Okay, so welcome everyone. A quick note that we are recording, and the recording will be published on our YouTube channel, History at Newcastle. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, wherever you may be located, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and in particular to the Pamalong clan of the Awabakal people of the land on which the Callaghan campus resides and where we who are in the room are located today. Our speaker today, Dr. Amir Moghadam, is conservator at the University of Newcastle. He is a historian of the modern Middle East, focusing on historiographical and mythological narrations and the role of historical monuments and texts in shaping collective historical consciousness. He has previously published on power dynamics and the development of historiographies in the Middle East. His most recent project examines the impact of the Ottoman upheavals during the early 20th century on the Iranian political landscape. His paper today is clearly related to this project and is titled Communicating Violence, My Journey in Translating Talaat Paşa. Amir, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone, and good, very early morning for some of you. So I really appreciate you attending this session. It's very hard to call myself a historian in front of some of the people who are present in this session. I would like to say that I'm mainly history researcher, and I would love to be called a historian of the modern Middle East. But apart from that, as I have mentioned here, I have worked as a conservator. My earlier education was in conservation, and it is very important about what I'm going to talk about. So this talk is about my translation project that I have done for the Lukas Kieser's work on Talaat Paşa. And for that, I just thought that I first give a little bit of background about myself and how I came about being interested in the topic, and then I gradually go through the book. When I have started conservation, one of my biggest questions was that why do we do this? Why do we care about historical monuments and historical objects and all of that? And this was my aching question throughout the time. But another thing happened at the same time, which I wasn't aware of it in that time. And that was most of my education happened in what I call an Armenian ghetto. So the place that we were studying was located in this Armenian ghetto. And me, being 18-year-old young guy, couldn't figure out at that time that what it was, but what I could feel was a type of living and the life experience that would have been shifted just by passing the gates of that district. Now that district have been gentrified, and now when I check it online, it's like the top town in the place that I was studying. But in the time, that was identified by old buildings and not paved like alleys and all of that. And to me, it was always this kind of strange feeling that I had about it. The other thing is that I myself am coming from bicultural family. So I'm partly am from Azerbaijani ethnic background, which is like a Turkish-speaking group, and these days very much is influenced by the Turkish mainstream Turkish discourse, and also a Persian background that it helped me to see, while the niceness and kindness of being in the multicultural environment, but also this kind of narratives and subtle biases and all of that. So it was very interesting situation that I've been experiencing, and it impacted me a lot on becoming interested in the matter of ethnic narrations and nationalisms in the later 20th century. And I think one thing is that although there are many of these examples, and Middle East is not an exception about any other, like from any other places. It happened in Europe, in Russia, in Ukraine, in all places. But for me, it was Middle East that was important. And for me, what was very protrudent in this Middle Eastern discourse was the Armenian case. And that was because it's been documented better, and I have lived with like for a certain time within the Armenian. I didn't have the chance of getting into the society. Now I understand it why, but in the time, like I couldn't understand the vulnerabilities of the Armenians against the mainstream community that they were living in. And then when I came to Australia, I was trying to study the same question. Very interestingly, what I have realized, and it doesn't reflect on anything, but in the time that I was trying to study this problem in not Armenian, but in very general sense of ethnic discourses and nationalist discourses in Australia, there were very few interested schools being interested in the topic. And for me, it was a shock, because when you are thinking of Western universities, you always think that, I'll go and do this critical work and there would be, but it was very difficult to get an interested school in it. And it only happened in University of Newcastle by, I think, a miracle. And I need to also acknowledge the role of Philip Dwyer in making this thing even much more interesting at that time that I was like about in the middle of my thesis, the history of violence in this university. And then Hans Lukas came, and that was fantastic for me, because when I was doing my PhD, I tried to decipher the theoretical grounds of this kind of superiority thinking within some communities in the Middle East as opposed to the others. And again, I emphasize that it's not the issue only in the Middle East, but it affected me there. So, I mean, people can talk about the European context in their own right, American, Australian, of course, but that was like, my question was in the middle. So I mean, if we look at it from evolutionary and psychologically perspective, it's kind of like human phenomenon that happens, so we need to be aware of it. Anyways, the Armenian case and the work that Hans Lukas was doing was providing me with a good example, a very, very tangible example of what I was trying to describe. In my own previous work, I'm talking about, I use this term, Malle, which is an Ottomanized Ladino, like impacted by the Ladino, and then again used in the context of ghetto. So Malle in the modern Turkish, and Omid can correct me if I'm wrong, is called a district, and generally it is called poor district. It's kind of like a places of that are not the high income areas. But in the Ladino, it also had a connotation to the ghetto. So I use this term to call the problem, the problematic phenomenon that I had, that was that district that creates an environment of being subjected to biases, and in term like Georgia government calls it camp, but it also it's not a camp. It's kind of very strange environment that you are there. You think that you're free. You think that you're going around and all of that, but you also are a subject of sometimes direct, sometimes passive biases and discriminations. And then I had another problem, which makes me unpopular in some senses, the problem of the term tolerance. I didn't like the term tolerance at all, because to me, the term tolerance by itself meant it has an expiry time. Like I tolerate you until a certain level, and then if there like that passes, then like I do not tolerate it anymore. And interestingly, the Talaat Paşa book addresses that question. Like, there are things in the conversations between Talaat and the other CUP people that these people have trespassed. They are siding with the enemy, and all of that language that is developed that calls the expiry of the tolerance. And when that tolerance is expired, bad things happen, as we know. So yeah, it was a kind of longitudinal type of example for me that the work of Hans Lukas was providing. And I was thinking that, oh, well, I mean, from the historical research perspective, it is very important. But also it is very important to our present. And I explain it shortly. So I embarked on hassling Hans Lukas, said, how about we translate this book and all of that. And we had a lot of conversations before going with the green light. And then Hans Lukas was kind and trusted me with this work, and we started. And as I went through the book, it was very interesting that how these kind of social relations unfolded through this very good example. The book of Talaat is not about, I mean, to me, I mean, we can look at it from very different perspectives. But more than anything, I think it's about a time that changed the entire Middle East. It changed the Middle East, like the Arabian Middle East, dramatically with shaping new countries. But also it changed Iran with changing the political discourse. And the reason for that was that as scholars like Huri Berberian mentioned, there have been a lot of relationships between the Iranian revolutionaries, for everyone who doesn't know, there was a very short time difference between Iranian constitutional revolution and the Turkish constitutional revolution, which went in very different ways. But there have been relationships between these people. And some of them were friends, some of them took refuge. And the Ottoman Empire at some point was a refuge for many Iranian intellectuals and constitutionalists. And it has a very, very strange relationships. It's like Ottoman Empire was a natural enemy of the Persian Empire, but also was a refuge to Iranian. Like it's kind of very dynamic and multifaceted relationship that we had, and I think we're still seeing it in the modern politics as well, kind of like uneasy friendship and non-friendship at points. But in the time when the borders were not matter so much, there is a dynamic relationship between people. We shared kind of languages. I mean, some Iranian constitutionalists knew Turkish, and some Ottomans probably knew at least parts in Arabic or French or anything that they could communicate. We have in the Iranian memoirs and notes that they have talked to each other It doesn't mention what language was it, but they were so close. So they shared ideas. Back to the Talaat Paşa. So it was like, it's about a very important time, and the things that unfolded and progressed through like a discursive settings that could have happened maybe in somewhere else as well. One thing that Ottoman Empire in the time had was, plus this strong ideology that was going through, there was a mechanical tools and industrial structure that was there as well. So it was a very important factor. But like, we didn't have such thing, for example, in some other peripheries. And I think this is one thing very important for the Iranian, or I suggest for this book to be translated in Arabic as well, for the Arabic-speaking person to read and look for the similarities. When I was reading this book, and so I had to research the personality of Talaat Paşa and know him as much as I could, which is a very difficult task, because there's not much about the life of Talaat in the earlier part of his life. And also I had to give a background to the Persian-speaking person about what was happening. Not that the Armenian genocide is absolutely unknown in Iran. There are books about it. There are people knowing about it. But I think in very general term, the last years of Ottoman Empire in the Middle East is the reign of forgotten history. We tend to forget about it. We don't like mentioning it. Maybe it is about the brutality of the time. Maybe it's about many other things that happened in that era. But also, I think it's about the model that later on every nationalist movement in the Middle East took from the successful late Ottoman version. We looked up in that sense to the victory of this Ottoman discourse that happened, and I mean, that created the idea of one-party, centralist, strongman-led concept of government that is resisting many of the diplomatics and also like international deals from one hand. And also, if you look at the personality of Talaat Paşa, it is very interesting because he was loved at one point by Westerns. So Germans, like, he was a hero in the German the newspapers, and like they were thinking that he's a kind of like strong and very efficient person. Beside him, Anwar also was I think is a great media figure or celebrity at the time. Talaat didn't want to be a celebrity, but he was also like presented in a very positive light, at least to some point. And this is very much interesting because Talaat was not a typical religious figure as one can see it in the media today. He was a very much Western, like appearing, tidy, no beards, no, like, I mean, he is a presentable person in the photographs, and that was also interesting for me because it tells you things that how the personalities can become like by themselves can change the whole discourse around what's happening in every country, and that he is a good example, but he's not the only example. And and also it shows that when you read that book, you see that how his personal interest in that topic was also influential in everything that was happening. Like in the telegraphs that he says, like you can see that at least parts of it is very personal. And I mean, personal at a career level or personal at a like a personality level, I don't know. And it's very hard to find out. But for example, if someone resists or delays the killings, he is very upset and angry and said, like, I mean, do this and no excuse being accepted, all of that. At the same time, it's very interesting that he has a kind of denial approach to whole thing that is happening. There is a person from the Iranian constitutionalists that sees what's happening in Iraq and in the Ottoman Empire at the time with the Armenians and goes to Talaat and says, I mean, it doesn't suit a kind of it doesn't suit the Ottoman Empire for people to be treated like that. And he says, oh, I didn't know about it. I tried to fix the problem, and for sure I'm right. and when I read that in lines with what was in the book, and the book means the Talaat book, it is at the same time that he was doing the most atrocious things, and he just, I mean, he was kind of very strange person. So it's very important for the Persian, and I hope in future for Arab reader, because it shows that at times that we move, and in fact, I think the changes in the last 10 years also supports this idea. We need to be careful about when we move on, when every society moves on from one type of authoritarianism, it is very easy to fall into another authoritarianism with another shape or form. And it is very important for everyday people to be aware of it, because after all, like as it's in the book, at least at some point, some people in towns were like they didn't mind about what's been happening, at least, and it is something that I also reflect to other societies in the region, that we have this responsibility to mind for these things. It is very important. Like, it doesn't stop with one minority or one group that we call like other. It can go in very very negative way, and so I was translating it, and I was providing examples of what's happening. There are addresses to other genocides in the book that I needed to explain, not genocide, like massacres in the book that I needed to explain to the Iranian audience that what was that. So it's kind of like in this book there are a lot of notes and explanations that makes it easier for the reader to understand what was happening in the time, and then through this research I was relieving some of those events, because you think that then such and such event that happened here, it's very similar to what happened in the time of the Talaat projects for eradicating the Armenians, and then you feel like it's kind of very strange feeling, because you feel something that you didn't feel in that time because you didn't know about it, or you were too young to understand it, or anything. People disappeared, or people became marginalized, or all of it. So it's a very, very eye-opening book, I think, especially for like from historical research perspective, it's good for all you, like every reader, but especially for Iranians and I think the Arab Middle East, it is very important because it creates a kind of mirror that we can see our past in it. Not so much, maybe there wasn't very similar, but you could see the patterns. And to me, those patterns are important because from psychological perspective, we may feel stereotypes against other people, but we may not have the tools to apply the stereotypical projects that we had against them because we don't have the tools for it. But if that is stereotypical thing, or if that ideas are not being resolved, when we have the power, we might do that. And it is very dangerous thing. Names may be different. Today might be another ethnic group. Today might be another minority. And I think this is across, as we can see it in like Ukrainian and Russian examples or anything. Names might be different, but the patterns would remain the same. And we need to stop that cycle of patterns to happen, which I think in the past 100 years have been, like the scholarship on that have not been in the center of the Middle East scholars study. I'm not, like, there are very good people working on it, but it wasn't in the historiographical teachings. So when you are going to school, I mean, you rarely hear about this. I mean, you rarely hear about even like what happened in the World War I and in per se. And interestingly, I get to the like the publishing part. When I was trying to publish this book, generally in the normal situation, there is a publisher that asks for the permissions to the other publisher. But in the Iranian case, because of the many reasons, that is not possible. So I needed to find a publisher that Hans Lukas, as an author, can communicate, if he wants to communicate with them himself. The Princeton publications also can easily communicate with them. So the copyright and everything would be observed, and the book would be published as it was, not with any changes. So I had to look into North America or Australia or Europe to publish this book. So I contacted a number of publishers. Interestingly, they were kind of like resistance in the beginning. Oh, we know everything about early Turkey, like late Ottoman Empire, and we don't need any other publication on that topic. I said, you don't even know Talaat, like, or like, because for them, story starts with the like the post-Talaat era. So it's not Talaat, it's the other figures, and said, well, okay, then there's this great publications in Netherlands that accepted to publish this book, and I'm very appreciated of Iran Academia to be able to accept publishing this book. So ideally, it would have been perfect to publish it within Iran, but because of the copyrights and other issues, it was not, like, I couldn't be sure of safeguarding the author's rights. And yeah, so the book being published, and I had to reread and all of it, so that we had, I was lucky that Hans Lukas was here, so we could have troubleshoot the problems, or like the terminologies that I have used, or like decipher what I was meant in that. Sometimes I had to change the grammar structure or the beginning and the end of the end of the paragraphs to make more sense for the Iranian audience. And yeah, I think that it went very well. And then I had to see that how readable was for the educated Iranian audience. So I shared it with few friends, and I got very, very nice feedbacks, and said, "This is a sad book, but it is very, very telling." And like one of them would have said that it's amazing to see the patterns that was happened in that time of the history, and we wish to knew about it before. Anyway, I think it's for any book reading society, it would be a good book. I think in the light of what's happening in the politics at this time, if anyone who is going to be active in the diplomacy, in the regional matters, in the policy making, it would be a very good book for them to give a concise but like informative reading, and relatively not so long, comparing with like 500. Like we had about 400 pages, but like you can read it in form of chapters. So like each chapter, it's better to be read as a like sequence, but people can read chapters as a separate thing, as a separate reading. And I think it gives a good understanding about how do we behave even now, and in the light of what's now specifically happening. What are the roots of those threat feelings? What are the roots of those issues that we cannot fix it now after 100 and something years? And I think if we deny it, if we don't look at it, we are doomed to repeat it. So I would like to greatly appreciate Hans's time, attention, and trust. Thank you very much for trusting me with this book. And we are going to continue our work, hopefully, for a foreseeable future. And also, I would like to thank my partner to tolerate me being a boring person, sitting angrily, translating something, because it took a long time. And the reason that it took a long time was that fundamental. When I started the book, I thought that I know everything. But when I wanted to translate it, I realized that I need to know these people a bit more personally. So I'm very close to Talaat now. I know him very well, as much as possible. And so I embarked in a lot of reading. So yeah, it wasn't possible without support of Hans Lukas and also my partner, who supported me during this project, and I really appreciating of that. Sorry. And yeah, so thank you very much, Hans and Zara, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
a fascinating paper. I open the floor to questions.
Perhaps, if I may, thanks very much, Amir. Could you perhaps give a few examples where you had to modify certain terms? Let's say Islamists. You once said to me, you cannot use this term telkel, so 1-1. So could you a little bit work about these concrete challenges you?
So like Islamist has, for example, like it's a good example. like the term Islamist has a kind of connotations now. I mean, in the Western world, the term Islamist is one thing, and in the Middle Eastern world, the term Islamist is something else. And I needed to be careful about not addressing to religious people who were not supporting this, because it is very much a vibrant discussion in the Middle East, where like everyone who is in the field knows that when you start to talk about that concept, because one thing that is very interesting is that because of that kind of not knowing, we think that the first genocidal activity that happened was the Holocaust. Okay, so we skip this big thing that actually happened in the Middle East, which was proportionately, maybe the numbers are less, but proportionately, if not bigger, it's equally like horrifying. And one way or another, like it happened through some, like at least some religious motivations, like nationalism mixed with religious ideas. I know, and there is in the book also, that not every like Muslim person was supporting this. There are very good people who were passively against it, like Javid, for example, that like he was not approving this. Also, some local people who rescued some of the Armenians. Also, for example, in the Iranian observers of this, not observers, the Iranians witnessed the situation. There's a mixed reaction and all of that, and in Arabs also, like in Syria, in Iran, all of that. Because we need to remember that what happened as a genocide, it wasn't in Anatolia itself. It was also in Iraq, it was also in Syria, it was also in Iran. And the Iranian part is something that we don't talk about it much. Anyways, so there are Muslims who were not supporting this, but also this was support. Like if you look at the ideologues of these ideas, they were using religious language. So anyway, it was like as if that in the German case, like not all Christians are there, but we cannot deny the use of mythologies and narratives. This is going to my previous research. Mythologies that were used to desensitize the killings. Anyway, so I had to deliver a chunky explanation that what do I mean here by Islamists? And anyway, we call it Islamist. Sometimes, like I was trying to say, like control, like use another term, but after all, I realized that, well, we need to be honest in this. And so I tried to explain that by Islamist, we mean such and these groups, and all these explanations that I gave, that this is not reflecting on Islam, it reflects on some people who use that. This is not reflecting on the Turkishness, because I'm part Turkish, but it happened in that land. And it also happened in the parts of Iran and all of it. So it's not about like the people who we, like in that sense, we need to look at it responsibly and critically about what happened in the past. But it doesn't happen in the nice person, like it doesn't reflect on the nice person that having a daily life in East Turkey or in West Iran or in South, like in North Syria. Like we need to be careful about the language that we use, so we address precisely what kind of phenomenon that you're talking about. And yeah, like Turkishness, party one party, strongmen, like there were a lot of like Islamism, all of it. They needed a lot of changing and not changing explanations and removing the stereotypes, and also like giving examples of what do I mean exactly by it, and what was the, of course, like we shared it with Hans Lukas, and we cleared that what we mean as an author and a translator by that. And it was a lucky situation because I had access to the author. In many cases, people, when they translate the thing, they don't have access to the author, as I had this luxury. So we could decipher what I meant by it. And yeah, so that's it.
Fascinating. Thank you. I'm curious. You said, and I think it's a really important point, that other nationalists and other revolutionaries in the region turned and looked to the Turkish nationalists and as a model. And you spoke about the sort of role of the strong man and the centralized state and the one-party system. But this is a book that also very much is addressing violence and mass violence. Do you see this as also a model that was being drawn on, the sort of mass violence and the process of genocide itself? And if so, where do you see that unfolding?
Yeah. Yes and no. And the yes and no is that for sure, like the triumph of Ottomans in what was their project. I mean, not Ottomans, not old Ottomans. Again, like it's very, the CUP, the Committee of Union and Progress, with their political and ethnic engineering project. So let's be precise there. Was a very intriguing model for other groups. So the difference, as I mentioned in the talk, was the industrial scale and the support of like the German Empire in that case, and most of the Westerns for a long while turning their faces away from what's been happening. But if we look at, for example, if you look at, I mean, I'm not talking about the Germans taking model from Ottoman Empire. That was very studied and read. But see the ethnic cleansings that you see in Iraq. Okay, for example, one good example. I mean, and also in other places, but we can talk about Saddam Hussein because nobody is getting offended by talking about Saddam Hussein. In case of ethnic cleansing that he has applied for the Kurdish ethnic groups, you could see that he has used the same language. I mean, he wasn't thinking the Kurdish people as people. And I mean, it's very close because he also used the chemicals and also in the terms, in the case of Halabja or other places, that clearly, like, he was using the terms that are not used for human beings. So yes, there are, but one difference is that the time has passed, the technology was not the same. So this is one, like the other project that we do with Hans Lukas is about, I mean, about the same thing, with more focus on the historical examples that how it changed the landscape in the region, like the historical and this political discourse. But we clearly can see that, yes, there was, but maybe they couldn't do it as they did it because, after all, Ottomans, like the CUP was a very influential and powerful and well-structured government within the government, even before they become a government. But look what's happening now in other places. They're very similar. language and denial. Oh, we didn't do anything. It happened. But like nobody takes responsibility to.
Thank you. I just want to check if there's any questions online. Perhaps while we're waiting for that, I might ask another question, if I may, about the publisher, because I found it really interesting that you've chosen a publisher that is located outside of Iran, and you've mentioned that there are books on the Armenian genocide in Iran. Is it one has an image, I think, very often in Western countries of Iran as a very closed place. Is it possible for this book to be distributed in Iran itself, or what will that process look like?
I really don't know, because like Iran is a very interesting case, because things can be published there, and the other day they might change. The thing is that there are books on Armenian genocide. But the difference of this book and many of the other books is that the other books, like the case of Armenian genocide, is very much a foreign thing in the current literature that we have. Okay? We have a good Armenian, very small, but very good Armenian community in Iran. But the percentage is not that big. So like we're talking about less than like a few 100,000 in 85 million, okay? So the whole concept is a foreign thing. Interestingly, a few historical events helped that too. Like you are the scholar of the East European thing. So you know about the migration of the Polish to Iran and all of that. So names changed, and in some point, like Armenian, not in the intellectual, but like there are connotations of Armenians to be something Christian and foreign, but inside, it's, as our government says, they are standing on the edges of the society. Good one, like comparatively in Iran to the other places, it's not anything like what happened like with the minorities in Syria or in Iraq or anything like that. But it's very small community. It's Armenians, the Assyrians, the Assyrians and the South Christians are mainly ethnic in Iran. Armenians are migrated to Iran in the 17th century and post 17th century. So they have been always a kind of foreign thing with not a negative tone, but I hope that I can explain what I'm saying. So anyways, anything that have been published about them was foreign. This book actually is also about Armenian genocide, but it also reflects on every person in the Middle East. And that is what I find it very interesting. It is not about how many people got massacred in that city, which is very valuable. But this is coming closer to us as a people, and to that danger that this can happen anywhere. This still can happen anywhere after 100 years. And because of that, I don't know. I hope people become interested in it. It's a good thing that the publisher is interested in it. And the publisher is an academic publisher. And we are going to have another session later this year about the book. We had a good feedback from an Iranian academic who provided a note for the back of the book. And in general, there is this thing that I like about, not that because I'm Iranian, but we have started to ask hard questions about ourselves. And I think this is very distinguishable in that region. We are critically now looking at ourselves, what happened. We have become as a nation, and of course I'm generalizing it, but again, like intellectuals and others, about asking questions about what happened in the past. There are nationalists, there are chauvinists, there are ethnic people who want to become, like, get rid of. But we also have started to asking those hard questions. And I think this is very important in the political landscape of the region. I think this is unique and we have paid a big price for it, but now we are asking questions. And I think this is very timely book to just, even if they are not interested in the Armenian case, about using that book to know that how political environment can be shaped if we are not careful about asking hard questions in time.
Access it digitally.
Yes,
because
yeah.
There will be a digital version.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Like, I mean,
Okay.
one thing is thank the digital world. Like, everything now is digitally available. The book is mainly digitally available and print by demand, and there are some copies, of course. And because this is an educational institution publishing it, like, there may be a possibility in future to have more teaching sessions like around the book. They are doing it on the Kurdish matter, so why not on the?
Mhm.
We are conversing now with.
Fantastic. So not just a translation, but a start of something.
Yes,
bigger as
because
well,
it is,
sounds
for us, as I said, it is very topical now, in very general sense, that, like, again, in Iran, how do we behave in that kind of multi-ethnic, multicultural environment? The discourse of that centralist government that was in the early 20th century, that nationalist idea, is not applicable anymore. And we cannot go the path that the 20th century might go. So one way or another, we have to work on it. And I think this is a good source, besides other sources, to give us a little bit of understanding of, if we don't choose to acknowledge each other's existence. And I think that was the case that we always discussed with Hans Lukas, and I would agree that tolerance is not good. Acknowledging each other's right to existence is good.
Nice.
And on that point, I think, we can conclude this conversation if there's no any other question. There's something in.
Is it? Sorry, I don't have the chat, so.
Oh, yeah, that's a comment. Yeah.
Grand. All right. So we might bring things to a close. So please join me in thanking Amir again for an absolutely fascinating paper.
Thank you very much.
Just before everyone goes, just a quick reminder that our next seminar will be next Friday, so that's the 22nd of September, and that one will be online only. It won't be on campus. It is our presenter will be Charlotte Greenhalgh from the University of Waikato, who will present on premature birth and participation in clinical trials since 1969. And we hope to see you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.